Howdy guys, Rex here. Today we're going to talk about troubleshooting precision and accuracy issues that you think are going on with your rifle. If your rifle's not performing as you think it should, what you need to do is go through a logical step-by-step process, a checklist, if you will, of things to kind of look at that are your most probable issues, so that you can streamline this process and save a lot of time and cash. And so that's what we're going to go over today here. First off, guys, if you suspect anything is going on with your rifle, okay, what you need to do is you need to bring it back to 100 yards max. You don't want to be dealing with all the different variables encountered, at long ranges, medium ranges, things like that. Or if you're out in a field trying to, like if you took a shot at a deer running and you didn't hit it, then you need to bring that rifle back to 100 yards and actually do a performance evaluation of that rifle under controlled conditions in so much as far as possible, right? You're not going to be able to control everything, but that's going to eliminate like a lot of stuff that would maybe throw you off otherwise. So bring it back to 100 yards, get it on paper, and the paper won't lie to you. You'll eliminate a lot of those variables. So there's two different basic categories of ways your rifle is, maybe potentially having issues. You got major problems, and then you got subtle issues where you think it could be shooting a little better, but you're not exactly sure what you need to do to get it there. If all of a sudden you experience like an issue to where you're normally grouping, let's say, at a minute of angle, and all of a sudden it's like a 3-minute of angle rifle or a 5-minute of angle rifle, or you can't hit paper anymore, that's what we're going to call a major issue. If you're shooting for groups and you're trying to tighten it up, and you're trying to get like all of them in one hole, and you're already shooting around, 1 minute of angle or maybe a little bit bigger than that, and you're trying to evaluate what's going on with the rifle, then that's more of a subtle issue. So those are two different categories of issues that guys typically deal with. The first one is what we'll go over first. If you all of a sudden encounter this major problem that this rifle is not shooting for nothing, you can't hit the broadside of a barn all of a sudden, there are some common mechanical issues that do happen that can just all of a sudden immediately reduce that potential of that rifle to shoot accurately. First off, you want to check for the free stuff, the stuff that's not going to cost you a lot of money. You don't need to run down the store and buy a new scope and buy new ammunition right away. You just check the obvious stuff for free that you can do out in the field. Doesn't cost anything to see if maybe that's the issue. Obvious stuff, which is sometimes obvious after you find out what it is, but a lot of guys might not admit that until they trip over it. You'll be surprised how many times something comes loose like a scope base from the receiver. What you need to do is a wiggle check. You need to grab on this rifle scope and twist it around a little bit and see if there's any discernible play in there. It doesn't take much, but if you can hear a little bit of rattle in there, if that is even a little bit loose, there's your problem. Also, you want to check the scope rings. For the same deal, you want to kind of make sure that everything's nice and tight. If your scope mounting system is loose at all, you're going to miss by feet at 500 yards, and you're going to have minute of basketball performance at 100 yards potentially. Another common issue guys run across sometimes is loose action screws. We're talking about the screws that hold the barreled action into the stock or chassis, okay? There's usually two of them, and there's a third screw, which is a trigger guard screw, but they're gonna be located somewhere in here. What you need to do is make sure them aren't coming out. If those suckers are loose, you'd be surprised how much that'll throw you off. If all of a sudden, your rifle normally shoots like this and is shooting like this, you could potentially have loose action screws. And there's been a lot of times, I'll tell you, where guys spent $300, $500, $700 getting new loads, like working for years on it, and something silly like that was the issue. It's just a loose action screw. If this barreled action is not bedded tightly into this stock, it's going to have horrible harmonic exacerbations. It's going to be rattling inside there, and that recoil is going to be transferred very inconsistently throughout the rifle, which are internal ballistic issues, which will cause major shot dispersion. So make sure your screws are tight. Sometimes, this is a little more rare, you will actually have like a loose barrel, especially if you're running like an AR-15 or some of the cam lock barrels. If you have a rifle where the barrel is easy to take in and out, on a standard Remington style bolt action, they're threaded in, they're typically not going to come loose. But if you have a quick detached barrel of some kind, or something with a barrel nut, it is possible to see them loose, and I've seen that lots of times in the field over the years. And if you have a loose barrel, you might have a good group in one spot, all of a sudden it throws a fly or a foot off to the side, and then it might group there for a while, and it'll kind of change around. And just like any other mechanical issue we'll have. And so double check to make sure that's tight. Another thing you can check out too is if you have a rifle stock or a chassis that has a detachable forearm, a piece that is separate from the rest of the rifle. For example, an AR-15 style chassis or rifles where the forearm is attached by screws or bolts. That's something too that if that forearm is loose and you're resting that rifle on artificial support up front and that sucker's loose, that will cause major dispersion issues potentially out in the field. So double check that. Grab on that forearm, give it a little twist, give it a little wiggle. Again, if there's any discernible wiggle in there, that's going to cause some potential major issues. Another deal that can really get you is a loose muzzle device, okay? Especially if you're running a silencer or a suppressor, the politically correct term, right? If that sucker's unthreading on you, that'll cause major dispersion as well. Likewise with the muzzle brake or even an end cap. If you've got loose parts anywhere attached to the end of the barrel here, that's going to cause major shot dispersion as well. Just simply give it a twist, check, see if it's tight enough, and that could be the issue as well. And the next deal to eliminate, if you went through the entire rifle and everything's tip-top, nice and tight, nothing's obviously loose or wiggling, what you might want to check is the optic itself. This does happen quite commonly as well. The scope can go bad. Usually it's one of those other issues we just talked about. Something in the system is loose. You got a loose screw someplace, and that's throwing off your accuracy. The next thing you're going to want to eliminate is your scope. So what you're going to have to do is do a basic test. You're going to remove the scope from this rifle and put it on a rifle you know shoots fine and see if that rifle shoots fine. Likewise, you can do it the other way. You can remove the scope in question and put on a scope you know works fine on that rifle. And you can eliminate whether it was the optic or the rifle. Another issue that folks run into concerning optics is just that they're not adjusted properly. Diopter adjustment is very important. You need to learn how to do that. And then also if your parallax is not set properly, it's very easy to have your head slightly misaligned with the crosshairs, and that'll translate to quite a lot of throw off even at 100 yards, and that'll cause issues as well. So do make sure your parallax is indexed properly for the distance you're at. If you're at 100 yards, make sure it's parallaxed at 100. A lot of times your focus will be up here. Sometimes you have the parallax focus on the side. But you do want to make sure that everything's adjusted properly on the scope. You want to have a good, nice, crisp view of the reticle. That's your diopter adjustment. And then you do need your parallax to be set properly for that distance. So if you go through all that stuff and your rifle's still shooting horrible, then you have to start looking at potential mechanical issues in terms of damage on the rifle. It's very possible your crown, that's the end of the barrel here, could be maybe scuffed or damaged. That's one thing that will throw it off quite a bit. Sometimes you'll have the bolt locking lugs will have an issue with sometimes there's metallurgical problems in the steel. Something might chip if all of a sudden you get like heavy drag on your bolt or something like that and it's shooting bad. That's an indicator that something maybe mechanical's going on. Stuff like that, you're going to want to have a gunsmith actually diagnose and check for you. But that's stuff that costs a little bit of money, so make sure you do all that other stuff first. Check for loose screws, eliminate them, make sure the optic is working fine, and then you can work away to issues like that. There's a whole other category of issues that a lot of guys, and this is probably more of a common issue, is they're looking for better performance. They think that, maybe the rifle can shoot better than it is. If you're shooting 1.5 minute, 2 minute groups, and you're pretty darn sure that the rifle can do better, and you're trying to figure out what the heck is going on, there is another checklist of things you can look at. That's a different category of problems. Major issues is usually something mechanical, something got loose. But if you're trying to refine the subtleties, then it is subtle things that you have to start paying attention to make sure that everything's perfectly in order. It's very, very difficult to bring a rifle from 1 minute of angle to putting them in one hole. There's a lot of stuff that has to be absolutely perfect. You can't just slop your way through that. So there's another checklist that we're going to go over to get your rifle squared away in terms of maximizing its precision potential. First off, you're going to go through the checklist we just went over, the mechanical issues, but you're going to want to look over it a lot more closely. You're going to want to make sure everything is absolutely perfectly torqued to specification. Some rifles are more fussy than others with torque specs. For example, action screws. Look up whatever the torque specs for your rifle are and make sure that they're torqued appropriately. If you're trying to get from 1 inch to all of them in the same hole, it doesn't take much at all. Any kind of microscopic rattling will be an internal ballistic issue potentially on that system, which will cause it to not shoot all of them into the same hole. So eliminate that right off the bat. After you've eliminated that something isn't slightly, just barely, maybe a little bit torqued wrong or loose, then you have to start evaluating very closely the loosest potential nut of all of them. That's us. That's the guy shooting the rifle. Sometimes this is difficult to self-evaluate. So if you find someone with bigger antlers or a longer beard than you, the elders who have been doing this for a long time, having them watch you and see what you're doing can be very helpful. If you don't have that luxury, if you don't know anyone who can maybe help you out with that, go over the 4 fundamentals of marksmanship and self-evaluate that you're executing all of them with absolute perfection. Really, if you have a rifle that normally shoots them all in the same hole and all of a sudden one day it's shooting like an inch group, that's very common even for guys like me. If you just get a little bit sloppy on any one of those fundamentals, you want to make sure your natural point of aim is perfect. You're not muscling the rifle. You want to be comfortable behind the rifle to where those crosshairs at rest are perfectly centered exactly on the center of that bullseye. Aim small, miss small. You got to have your head perfectly aligned behind that rifle scope. Maybe you got an ergonomic issue going on with a cheek piece that's not adjusted properly, or maybe you have a rifle that needs a cheek piece and you don't have one. Something that can help you situate your head behind that scope very, very consistently from shot to shot. Your eyeball has to be perfectly centered behind that optic every time. If it's not, that'll throw you off considerably. You also want to make sure, obviously, that you're, besides aiming small, that you have good trigger control and that you're not throwing off the rifle with your own biological problems. I'm talking about heartbeat, breathing, muscle in the rifle, nervous twitching, too much coffee. Any one of those deals can potentially transfer our biological energy, our wiggliness into that rifle system. The more you grab it on that rifle sometimes, the worse it gets. So you're gonna have to self-evaluate that. Guys that want to get into that in super good detail, we do precision rifle training that helps you to evaluate what's going on there with that. So whatever kind of input you put on the rifle has to be exactly the same every time. Whether that be cheek pressure, palm pressure, if you're grabbing on the palm, any kind of input you put on the rifle has to be absolutely consistent. Whether that be your cheek, your hand, the buttstock. If all of a sudden one of those deals is varying just slightly in pressure that you're applying to the rifle, that'll throw you off quite a bit. That'll definitely take you from a one-holer to something that's shooting a little bit bigger than that. There's a lot of potential marksmanship issues that are usually 90% of the time, if you're trying to get a one-hole rifle to shoot one hole and it's not, usually it's us. And that goes even for guys that have been doing this for 30-some years, okay? I ain't picking on nobody, it's just a fact of life. We do have good days and we have bad days. Sometimes we get so complacent with our abilities that we kind of slop through it. That means you need to slow down and evaluate each one of those steps of marksmanship very, very closely to see if you're perfect. If you can determine that you're not throwing nothing off and your marksmanship is totally sound, now you need to go through a very close examination of your firing position. If you're shooting off a bench, you have to look closely exactly how that rifle is interfacing with its support, whether that be artificial support on top of a bench or on the ground. Whatever's going on, you got to look for stuff that could potentially be wiggling around. Something that's changing from shot to shot to where the lay of the rifle is different from shot to shot. Anything like that will take you from a one-hole rifle to an inch and a half very easily. You need to make sure that you go through the entire system in all detail, all the way into the ground. If your bench is wiggling a little bit, it's going to be a problem. If your bipod is not attached firmly, or if the tension on the bipod is not adjusted properly, we show you guys how to do that in the training. That could change your point of impact and increase your group size. There's infinity issues that can happen, how the rifle is sliding across the top of a bench. If you have to reposition yourself behind that rifle from shot to shot, what you're going to find is that each time you have to reposition. That's a new firing position. And unless you're really good at duplicating it, after getting off the rifle and getting back on it to readjust everything, it's going to be hard to get it all in the same hole, guys. So idealistically, when that rifle recoils, your firing position should be so solid that nothing is moving. All you have to do is put a new round in there and get back on that trigger and send that next round. If you can't do that, then something's wiggling around. If you have a lead sled or anything else, any kind of support that's trying to help you out, you are now responsible to make sure that those artificial support mechanisms or whatever kind of equipment you're using to help you be steady is actually helping you, not hindering you. The more complexity you add to the system, the more difficult it gets. If you can't get it to shoot good, what I usually like to do is get prone, make sure there's no grass in the way, lay it on some sandbags. You want a sandbag up front and a sandbag in the back. Manipulate that toe support, get it dead steady until those crosshairs are absolutely perfect. And that's probably the easiest way to get consistent firing position is on sandbags. If you got good tight locking sand like paver sand or something like that that locks up nice and good. Sometimes benches or devices designed to help you be more steady can actually add complexity to the system that can hinder you. And we go over that in detail in the seminars and the 0 to deadly live fire classes. So if your equipment's good, your marksmanship is good, which is very hard to do, don't bypass that deal, and your firing position seems like it's pretty sound, now you can start worrying about the subtleties, the really tiny things that might be affecting you. A lot of guys jump straight to these issues like maybe my bore is dirty, maybe it needs a cleaning, maybe I need to do some kind of copper remediation. There's a lot of things that guys will blame it on before they blame it on themselves and how they set the rifle up and how they might be laying behind the rifle. That's just man nature, the Y chromosome kicking in, making us into little turkeys, not admitting that it could have been us. But if you truly do have all that stuff squared away as far as you can tell, and you're pretty darn sure there's something else going on, now you can consider like bore condition changes, okay? If you just cleaned your bore, that could be an issue to where your rifle might be acting differently than it was when that bore was totally seasoned. Sometimes it might take a few rounds to build up that bore fouling equilibrium that we talk about in the 101 series on our YouTube channel here, and that we expound on in our training seminars. That can be an issue. Some rifles actually do shoot better dirty. That's quite common, especially in factory rifle barrels. If you just clean the bore and the next series of rounds is not going where you want it to, maybe give it some time, give it a little more ammo, give it a chance to rebuild some copper fouling into the micro surface of the steel that smooths it out in the long run. Once it reaches that equilibrium or that happy point, you're set. Some rifles might take just a few shots, some might take a couple boxes of ammunition to reach that point. If you do all that and that doesn't work, that comes to our next thing. You might need to troubleshoot your ammunition. Some rifles are fussier with ammunition than others, okay? Even if you got ammo that might shoot good in one rifle, you can have another rifle sitting right next to it that's the identical model, make, scope, everything, and it just doesn't like that ammunition. There's a lot of tiny subtleties that happen when we're talking about internal ballistics on how the rifle, that individual rifle's chamber was cut, how everything's put together, what the vibration patterns are doing in that particular rifle. The ammunition may or may not like that. So you might have to adjust your ammunition. Maybe try a couple different, borrow a few rounds from a buddy if he's got some gold match or some, Hornady or whatever. Change brands of ammunition. That's where you can start to reload. This is the point where you might start to actually see some progress through maybe a little bit of load development if you're a reloader, or change in ammunition if you're just shooting factory ammo. Maybe if all of a sudden one of them consistently, not anecdotally guys, one group ain't gonna tell you anything, it needs to be consistently shooting better, then you can eliminate that. Maybe, hey, this rifle likes this load. If that's the case, there might be some kind of axial misalignment in your rifle system that is causing it to be very fussy with ammo. There's a lot of other details that happen. We talk all about that at the seminar series. Another fact of life, guys, if all that stuff fails and you do everything perfect and you go through all those checklists and you just can't get that rifle to shoot good, it's another big possibility, which is actually statistically true that we might not like, is you might have had an anecdotal range experience. That means that it's the outlier. It's just the day where, for whatever reason, the moon was in the wrong position in the sky, you had the wrong kind of coffee in the morning, it doesn't matter, you can't identify it. Some days just don't work. Some days it's just a bad range day. Maybe set the thing down, go recalibrate, get zen someplace else, come back to the range when you're feeling good and happy about it, give it another try. you might find that you just had a bad day. That does happen a lot. Now, those are all the things you can look for free or for very little money to see what you can do to maybe adjust your performance a little bit. If all those things really don't work, now you can look for subtle internal ballistic issues, okay? We're talking about, you can look at maybe the way your rifle is bedded in the stock, maybe it needs to be bedded. If it's in a chassis, maybe it needs to be skim bedded, the back of the recoil lug sometimes. These are things where you might have to go and actually go to an armorer or a gunsmith and have them do an accuracy job on that rifle. That's the stuff that starts costing you, hundreds or thousands of dollars after a certain point, so it's best to knock out all that other stuff first. Don't go straight to the gunsmith right off the bat. A lot of guys do that and annoy the heck out of the gunsmiths when in fact it was a firing position issue or a marksmanship issue that they didn't know was going on. And the gunsmith is able to get the thing to shoot straight, but the guy can't. And so don't be that guy. But if all of a sudden, if you're pretty darn sure and you go through all those things very carefully, maybe you need, it's possible, maybe your barrel is not performing. Maybe your action does need to be trued a little bit. There are internal ballistic issues which we expound upon in great detail at the seminar, but after you sort all that other stuff out, then you can start looking at maybe some equipment improvements or some ways to get your rifle accurized mechanically. So I hope that video helps you out, guys. Don't be that guy that misdiagnoses your problem and chases his tail for years and years and looks like a goofball when he finally has someone else try the rifle. Just go through that logical step-by-step process. Don't miss any of those details. Don't skip any of those. Before you start spending money, look at obvious things, okay? Again, one final reiteration on the marksmanship issue. That's usually the deal if it's not some obvious mechanical problem, right? If you got a screw loose, that'll do it. But if it ain't something like that, usually it's us. I'm telling you, we're an infinitely complex critter, us humans. We're the biggest wild card in the entire equation, in all honesty. So it's important that we don't neglect to admit that. And if you have any questions, or if you want to do any kind of field evaluation or consultation, do come train with us at Rex Defense. You can Google that. You'll find out what we're all about, what we do. Lots of awesome experiences from a lot of students so far, having good times. We'd love to come and help you out and visit with you and figure out what's going on. If you have a rifle that you like, you think you can get better performance out of, bring that to one of our courses, man. We'll get you squared away. If you're curious on what kind of equipment will give you the least amount of issues, that's what we have the seminar for. We go over all that stuff in great detail, talking about the science of what goes on internally in your rifle so that you can determine what features you need, what attributes the rifle needs to possess. When you go to your gunsmith, you know what you're gonna try to get them to accomplish. And normally they know what's going on if they're a decent gunsmith, but it's nice to kind of have that information so that when you're selecting all these different pieces of equipment, you do it properly. So do come at the seminar if you have any questions there. Also, if you do enjoy this kind of stuff, subscribe to the channel and check out the 101 series, guys. There's like a lot of information there. A lot of it is being edited out and removed by the Google guys and the YouTube guys during their big giant crackdown. So do watch that while that's still available. And of course, participate in the commentaries. You guys are usually pretty darn smart. We got a good crowd here. Lots of knowledge to learn from. I learn stuff from you guys every day. And do participate in the commentaries. And we'll see you on the flip side.
You really thought you could get away with it, big guy?
You got it. Alpha 9 or Tango 1-3, this is Pirate Lizard King.
Indexing hasty solution is 7.
What in the hell are you holding?
It's not sure.
It's an MP49, that's a saw.
Target's got good cover. Look for danger space for a headshot at TRP-5.
Hi, Mom. It's me and my pals. Say hi, guys.
Yeah, dude. Oh, man.
You're shorter than I expected.
These are super.